Well, thank you. I think as questions are reaching us more, we're going to have to probably group them in a somewhat different way. But nevertheless, there's one that I would like to pose here because it does focus on something that you have already brought up in your address. And I think it is something that people in Germany, but probably in many other countries in Europe, have on their minds. And it says the following. I would like to know what concrete and obviously very effective mechanisms is the British Empire using to force and threaten the governments of European states, especially Germany and France, to keep them from installing a Glass-Steagall system in the interest, obviously, of their own nations and others, and also to keep them from taking first steps toward building and setting up national banks in their respective nations. The question says, what would happen if Merkel and Sarkozy, either together or on their own, would actually demand this kind of policy step? And what is the kind of fear that keeps them from not doing this and instead follow the fascist machinations of the financial oligarchy? The fear of personal consequences of this shouldn't be that big, especially in light of the fact that the representatives of the financial oligarchy just are having their very own Waterloo. And then the interesting comment, I do not think that this is due to the lack of sovereignty of Germany, which sovereignty has not been really restored since 1945, because France and other European nations apparently are just as unable to act these days as Germany is.
Well, I think it has probably different elements which work together. I mean, first of all, if people don't have a vision of the future, they just go along to get along. And I think that most politicians and most parties, they don't think in terms of what should be the aim of mankind 100 years from now, what should be the next step of the development of civilization, but they think how to maintain their position until the next election. I have met politicians who say, oh yeah, I'm for the common good, but not so much that it would threaten my career. And I think that element to go along, get along, move up in your environment, that for sure is a big element. I think what comes together with that is naturally the fact that when you have an individual who tends to step out of the mainstream and, think about the people and the civilization in large, like Alfred Herrhausen is a good example. Alfred Herrhausen in 1998 or 89 was supposed to make a speech in New York in December, where he was about to propose the development of Poland outside of the IMF using the model of the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau in the post-war period. And Herrhausen had, angered the oligarchy before when he proposed a general debt cancellation for third world countries. Well, he was killed before he ever could make that speech. And that generally was understood in the dramatic circumstances of German unification as a clear warning to Kohl to not step out of the present system of the IMF and similar institutions. And if you look at the number of assassinations of the so-called RAF, Red Army faction, they all targeted key individuals of the nuclear industry or some other basic industries of Germany and other countries. The same happened in Italy with Mattei, and basically a lot of such murders occurred. So I think there is always this idea that you get rid of people who have the courage to speak, for such ideas. But I think the main problem, right now, for example, it was our own presidential candidate, Jacques Cheminade, who has shaped our own, I mean, in spirit, our own, who is now a full-fledged presidential candidate in France, has shaped the debate for Glass-Steagall. The French socialist candidate Hollande has come out for a separation of the banks. Even Gabriel from the SPD is now for a separation of the banks, even if he still is for Eurobonds, and has obviously not thought this thing through, that you can't have the two because they belong to two completely different universes or realms of thinking. But I think now Mrs. Merkel says she is campaigning for Sarkozy. Now the French are really, between a rock and a hard place if they should laugh about that or say, in any case, they think it's a big mistake. In all likelihood, Sarkozy will lose the election, and Mrs. Merkel will have bet on the wrong horse. And, Sarkozy, unfortunately, stands for the maintenance of this system. And this system cannot be kept. So I think it is a mixture of all of these things. I think it's a somehow axiomatic desire to keep the world as it is, to stick with the axioms, to be part of the privileged class, to not risk anything. And it's a lack of education, frankly. I mean, I don't know why people think that Mrs. Merkel is a natural scientist, because she has shown absolutely no understanding of physical economy. She doesn't know anything about energy, otherwise she wouldn't have pushed this ridiculous exit from nuclear energy. I don't know what is wrong with her, but something is wrong with her, I can assure you. I think the key problem is that people don't have a vision where to go. We have one. We want to have a world where every human being on this planet can have a life in dignity, not only on the planet, but soon on other planets. If you have that vision, then you think completely different. And that is the best I can think.